But now it really is time to fancy things up with a Butter Tart Coffee Cake. So I'm taking that gooey center of a butter tart, but putting it on top of a brown sugar coffee cake. So starting with that coffee cake, I have my 1 1/3 cups of flour, and I'll add to that a 1.5 teaspoons of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon, and just a 1/4 teaspoon of salt. And I'll sift this in. 1/3 cup of packed light brown sugar. I'll give this a stir just to blend the brown sugar in. Now I want to cut in a 1/2 cup of unsalted butter. I've cut it into pieces, and I just need to work it in until it's crumbly. Now for the wet ingredients. 1/4 cup of sour cream. I have a single egg. I'll break over top the sour cream, and a teaspoon of vanilla. I'll just give that a little stir. I'll add it all at once to the flour sugar mixture with the butter in there. This will make a dense batter, but what's important that you beat this stage of the cake batter very well. It'll turn pale in color and light and fluffy. It takes about 3 minutes. A question I get asked often is how to grease your pan to best suit the recipe you're making. For a simple recipe that's stored in its pan, like a coffee cake, a simple greasing with butter or vegetable spray is absolutely fine. For a cake that you're going to take out of the pan and present, then you want to grease and dust the sides with flour, tapping out any excess. For a cake that you're going to decorate with frosting, say, and to minimize crumbs, grease the pan and then put parchment paper on the bottom and the sides. This will make clean, beautiful edges easy for frosting. So since this coffee cake I'm going to present but not frost, I want to grease and flour the tin. It only takes a couple of tablespoons of flour to coat the pan. Tap it around the pan. Make sure you get it in the corners. And you don't want to do this over your flour canister because now your flour has come in contact with the butter. Now, because this is a denser batter, I'll dollop it in, making it a little bit easier to spread. And I press it down and out at the same time. And spread it to make it nice and level. This is ready for the oven. I've preheated it to 350, and it takes about 25 minutes for it to cook. The skewer is clear, so I know now the cake is fully cooked, so I'm ready to put together the topping. I want to give the cake about 10 minutes for it to cool down. This will actually stop the cooking process. So when I put it back in the oven to bake the butter tart topping, the cake won't bake any further. Once you've taken a cake out of the oven, for just 5 to 10 minutes, it will actually stop cooking, so you can't put it back. Butter tart topping truly is just like the gooey filling that you find in a butter tart. So it starts with 1/2 cup of brown sugar. And what is different about this particular recipe, to get it to stay on top of the coffee cake, I have to add a few extra ingredients. Just 2 tablespoons of flour. It just gives the butter tart topping a little more substance. And 1/2 teaspoon of baking powder, 1/4 teaspoon of cinnamon. And I'll just give this a little whisk. 2 eggs. 1/2 cup of corn syrup. Just the golden corn syrup is fine. And that's part of creating the goo factor for this butter tart topping. And because this is a more refined, elegant version of a coffee cake, I like to spike things up a little bit. Just a tablespoon of brandy. Of course, it's optional, and you don't have to substitute anything else in its place. A teaspoon of vanilla. And a butter tart wouldn't be a butter tart without the butter. I have a 1/4 cup that I've melted, and I'll whisk this into the egg and corn syrup mixture. Whisk the eggs by hand so as not to overinflate them. You could actually souffle the filling, and then you end up with a crunchy layer at the bottom. I'm putting in a cup of raisins. And I whisk these to make sure they get nicely coated. So the cake still is warm, but now that it's been about 10 minutes, it has stopped cooking, so I can put the topping over the cake. And it does look just like a giant butter tart. Now it's ready for the oven, and I still keep the oven at 350, and it takes 20 minutes to set this nice topping. It looks exactly like a giant butter tart, so it has that nice bubbling top to it. So here I have one that's completely cooled, and you can see it looks exactly like a butter tart. So I'll just run my knife around just to make sure it's loose. There we go. And transfer the cake to my serving platter. Then, for a single sticky slice, just cut right through. So this is why I put the flour and the baking powder in. It creates that beautiful caramel-like syrup, the light crust just on top.